Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to, I guess it is afternoon right now. Good morning to those folks, though, on the West Coast. Welcome to Cleveland, for those of you here with us in person. For those of you on the webinar, thank you for joining us. This is actually the 17th McDonald Hopkins Energy Forum, so thank you, and I see a lot of familiar faces, those of you that have joined us before. I'm very excited about this particular program. It's so timely because of what's going on in the solar industry, and I really can't recall a better panel that we've ever had for one of these forums before, so I'm really anxious to not only hear from them, but quiz them a little bit as we get into our question and answer part of the program. For those of you that have been here before, you know that you can submit questions. You have cards in front of you, and feel free to write questions out, and there'll be people walking around. Raise your hand, and they'll pick up the questions and bring them to me. For those of you that are watching via webinar, you have the ability to email us questions, and those will get to me as well, and we'll do our absolute best to get to every single question that's been submitted. I do want to introduce just a couple people from the firm that are also here. Our president stopped by, Sean Riley, and Sean, thanks for visiting with us. And then Pete Williams here as well from our Columbus office. And Pete and Chad and I collaborate quite a bit on solar, and Pete's been a great help on the EPC part of solar projects. He's a great attorney for contractors, so it's great to have him with us today as well. So I thought we'd do, just to jump right into this, is I'm going to ask each of the panelists to come up and tell us just a minute or two about their organization and what differentiates their organization in this solar space. It'll give you a chance to know who's in front of you, and maybe it'll help you frame a couple questions as well. So starting out to my far right is Steve Chun, and he's the CFO for DEPCOM, Phoenix, Arizona-based EPC. And Steve, if you want to come up and give us a couple minutes, that would be great.
Mike, thank you very much for the opportunity to come to Ohio and present in front of this great crowd. DEPCOM Power is an EPC O&M company that specializes strictly on utility-scale solar. We have a tremendous team that has been doing this for over 10 years in the U.S. What's unique about DEPCOM is not only the focus on utility-scale solar power plant, but also our commitment to customer service and community outreach program as well. So some of the things that we do in DEPCOM that differentiate from others is that we provide 10% of our net income back to the community in the areas that we do solar build. We focus on providing jobs for our veterans. So we have a Veterans First hiring program. And finally, we also have an America First initiative where we work with our partners, whether it's a racking company to provide post cables and put initiative to make sure that American-made products are used in U.S.-based solar projects.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And next is my partner and good friend, Chad Arfons. As we tackle solar, it's very advantageous for us to have tax equity expertise at the firm, and Chad provides that expertise. And I'll stop so he has 2 minutes to talk here.
So I have to begin by saying that I refuse to do videos for the firm, and I think that Mike just sprung this on me just moments ago that I was going to do this. So I think it was a trick. But so I'm not prepared. But I think in terms of McDonald Hopkins Energy Group, it's really kind of representative of the firm. The firm is a full-service, mid-sized firm, and I think the energy department really works in the same way, where we're able to collaborate on a number of different types of energy projects and in a number of different areas where we can represent EPCs in construction matters, in litigation matters. We can represent developers in financing and basically all aspects of interconnection and regulatory issues, and represent investors in terms of tax equity financing and just deal structuring. And then obviously, as anyone who knows the Energy Forum, we represent all parties in oil and gas matters. And so I think our group really works together in that kind of collaborative deal-making sort of fashion that I think that's ultimately what makes us unique. So, thanks.
Thank you, Chad. Next is Mike Heist, and I got to know Mike. He worked at MCCO for many years. That's the energy plant down in University Circle. And if you drive down Euclid Avenue, I'm still surprised how many people have never seen this solar installation, but on the north side of Euclid, just east of Mayfield, there's a 1 megawatt solar array. And it really is, it's somewhat iconic. I mean, to have 1 megawatt of solar right there in University Circle, and that would not have happened without Mike Heist. So, Mike.
Thanks, Mike, for having me here today. Welcome. My name is Mike Heist. As Mike mentioned, I am the Director of Development for AEP Onsite Partners. AEP Onsite Partners is a wholly owned subsidiary of American Electric Power, headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. We were formed roughly 2 years ago as a non-regulated entity. So our focus is behind the meter opportunities to look for ways to help customers mitigate risk and also look for opportunities to manage their energy portfolio. So we were formed roughly, like I said, about 2 years ago to start looking for opportunities for existing customers. And again, since we're not regulated, we have the opportunity to really look across the nation as well to provide solutions. Our solutions are basically anything that can be done behind the meter. New technology, we're looking at that as well. So we have interest in solar. We do look at substations. We also have the ability to do behind the meter generation, storage, again, wind, solar. So we're looking at all different kinds of technologies to kind of support that end customer. And kind of what sets AEP Onsite Partners from the rest is that we have the ability, our board has been very forward thinking, looking for opportunities like this where we can invest AEP's financings through the in-house. So we can fund these projects currently through on-hand cash within the organization. And we also have the ability to take any type of tax equity that's available in the project and lump it all into one project. So we have the ability that we can do this all in-house. So that kind of what sets us apart from the rest. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. And then finally, Rich Dover is with C2 Energy. And Chad and I have had the opportunity to work with Rich over the last year or so, and just a very dynamic solar developer working across the country, based in New York City. So many great projects, great deals going on. We were very thankful that he could come in for a couple of days and spend them with us. Rich?
Good morning. My name is Rich Dover. My firm is C2 Energy Capital. C2 was founded in September of 2014 by myself and my partner, Candace McCowitz. She and I have been working together in the solar sector for going on about 10 years now. And C2 was originally, the original company name was C2 Special Situations Group. And the joke was at the time that everything in solar is a special situation. So we started the firm at a time where the maturation in the market was such that yields on projects were coming down substantially because it had become such an accepted investor asset. So we sought to look at corners of the market that were being underserved for any number of reasons. Hard deals for technical reasons, hard deals for timelines, hard deals for credit, and invest our own personal money into building the platform. We started quite modestly, and we started again with our own money, and we've reinvested everything back into the firm. We now own and operate approximately $300 million worth of asset value and are growing the portfolio substantially. But what differentiates us is, I think, a couple of things. Number one, our focus on what is termed non-residential solar. That means that we're not doing anything, obviously, on residential rooftops, but we're also not the necessary go-to source for mega utility scale projects, unless there's something where we can add value based off of our dynamic approach in terms of structuring or acquisition. We focus on 4 key areas: community solar, development M&A, where we're buying projects from developers that have been matured, key accounts, where we serve large corporate customers, hospital systems, utilities, and so on, and small utility scale. And so between these 4 areas, we continue to grow the platform, continue to grow the portfolio. We have offices in New Hampshire and in New York, and team members who are around the country who are participatory in development and business development opportunities.
Thank you, Rich. All right, so we'll jump into the Q&A. The title of this program is U.S. Solar Development in a Tariff World, so I think we should spend at least a few minutes talking about the tariffs that went into effect at the beginning of the year. So maybe, and I know everyone might have something to say about that, but Chad, maybe you could just give us a quick overview of the tariff, and then I know Steve, as an EPC, you're right in the middle of what the impact of that tariff has been. So Chad, you want to start us off?
Sure. So the tariff that was enacted was a Section 201 tariff under the, gotta refer to my notes here, the Trade Act of 1974, and the Trump administration put these into effect in January. And essentially what they are is a 4-year tariff that's a 30% tariff on solar cells and modules, and that 30% tariff steps down by 5% till the point that it gets to a 15% tariff in 2021. And there's an exemption under the tariff for the first 2.5 gigawatts of solar cells. And ultimately, I don't know how much background everybody wants to hear about it, but this was really the result of a claim that was made by 2 U.S. solar manufacturers that imports were essentially harming U.S.-based businesses in this space. And the process is that the U.S. International Trade Commission investigated it, made recommendations to the Trump administration, and ultimately the administration put out this tariff, which was apparently not the most severe that it could have been, but it's enough that it's caused the industry some pause.
No, so when I look at solar, I don't really look at it as just a renewable. I look at it as economic value, power, right? What does the power mean to the consumers? So our view is lowest cost of power is going to win at the end of the day, right? And we believe that solar wasn't a good path to get that. Last year, right before the solar tariff was, I guess, filed for petition, businesses don't like uncertainties. So soon as an uncertainty is introduced into the marketplace, there was chaos. And some companies, that were experienced in the marketplace did a great job of actually hedging that. A utility or an IPP, as soon as that happened, bought a huge chunk of solar modules in their balance sheet to get kind of certainty around the pricing and the lowest pricing that they could acquire at that point, which gave them a huge competitive advantage, and they're still taking that competitive advantage in the marketplace. So when a tariff gets introduced, there's uncertainty. Now we have some certainty because that was enacted in January. However, we have another uncertainty on steel. There is a steel tariff that's looming. There's modules, but there's also racking and steel posts that makes up the solar components, and that is also having havoc in the industry as well. So those kind of uncertainties makes it challenging for solar in this current environment. However, as the prices are going up, PPA price, which is the power that's ultimately sold to the off-taker, is still coming down, right, in a competitive environment. So there's going to be some trade-off. Somebody's going to have to take that extra cost into the margin, whether it's going to be the developer, EPC, somebody from the tax equity or the financing guys. So, but even with all that, we do believe that that's a kind of an intermediate problem. But if you look at the long-term overview, where the solar is going to be, not just in the U.S. but globally, I think we will overcome all these kind of uncertainties and become a valuable source.
The other thing that's going to happen too is, other countries and the EU are going to file complaints looking for their own tariffs in retaliation,
Yeah.
and so there'll be, likely some type of negotiation that goes on where, just like when President Bush enacted the tariffs and they were pretty quickly pulled back. So it's probably far from over.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the first time. I mean, there was a tariff on the Chinese modules a few years back, and smart people kind of worked around that and built factories in Thailand, Turkey, and there's other places to kind of circumvent that. So in this case, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some other smart people that's going to find ways to provide lower cost modules. And we do hear that there's some significant investment happening in the US. And I believe it's primarily due to the tariff issue, where Chinese module manufacturers are building factories. They have partnership now to build a factory in the US. We do see some very innovative folks that have been in the space building innovative solar technology that's going to be a pretty low cost. So we do see that kind of initiative and capital investment coming into solving a problem because of the tariff.
I think it's also just, the political side of this should not be understated. And if you think about the ratio, I should have probably come more prepared with these exact numbers, but I would wager that the ratio of solar manufacturing potential jobs in the United States relative to solar construction and development jobs in the United States would be a very minute fraction.
I read it was, I think, 1,000. The estimate from one organization was there's like 1,000 jobs in manufacturing as opposed to maybe 150,000 in construction and other aspects of the industry. So,
right, and you have firms like DEPCOM who are hiring veterans, working and investing in local communities, and all that this does is it either just delays projects where veterans and local communities aren't getting those benefits, or it cancels projects, which is a terminal effect relative to what, in my opinion, was a presidential administration that had nothing better to do than just kick an industry he doesn't like in the shin. And so it's not terminal, it's not fatal, it's just annoying, and it's costly, and it ultimately adversely impacts the final ratepayers and customers, because as I said, even when we got started 4.5 years ago, I mean, asset yields were already dropping to close to real estate-like investment levels, which is amazing. I mean, that's where you want the industry to be. So there's only so much you can squeeze between construction, between investment yields, between development yields, so on and so forth.
But I guess to one point you had made, Steve, is that the other thing too, from a PPA perspective, you'd mentioned that they're kind of staying flat even though the tariff did go up. Part of that, we can't lose sight that we did also get this year the 100% accelerated depreciation. So even though the tariff did go up from a PPA perspective, and I can't give you the dollar for dollar ratio, but that did help at least, if you're looking at development through a PPA structure with the right entity, you can then utilize that 100% depreciation to help offset some of that tariff impact.
No, absolutely. I think the costs are going up, but there is a lot of capital chasing out these projects as well, which is providing competition for asset owners to kind of bid into these projects. So thus, the PPA prices are either stagnant or coming down. But the market is in kind of an intermediate turmoil, but we believe that it will continue to grow in the future.
So just finish up on the tariffs. Are there domestic U.S. companies that will benefit, will expand operations, build factories, and will we see that results? Or Steve, your comment about workarounds is kind of interesting, or is this just a big workaround?
So I don't know if this is public information, so I wouldn't divulge it now, but we do know that there's a Chinese module manufacturer is actually building or is committed to build assembly factory here in the U.S. So I don't know if it's a U.S. company, but the U.S. company is off-taking those modules for that factory. So there's going to be some incremental benefit, but like as Chad and Rich communicated, that the number of jobs, the biggest advocate for us when we were arguing against the tariff was the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the last I think we saw was like almost 370,000 solar professionals in the U.S. That would get impacted because of the tariff, and that was the biggest argument. Were we fortunate to get 30%? We wish it would have been lower, but it could have been way worse too, right? But at least we have the certainty of that. And we do see that the price of the modules are coming down from where the 30% hit. So it's certainty with some competition is driving those costs. Whether it's going to benefit the U.S. companies, to be determined.
Right. I also think there's some culpability from the manufacturer side. We, in the first quarter of 2017, prior to the announcement, we were getting bids for a panel, prior to any tariff announcement or even the idea of it, at slightly above 30 cents a watt. Then the tariff gets announced at 30%, which presumably 9-10 cents. That price should be somewhere in the 40s. We were getting bids at 55 cents a watt.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that doesn't make any sense mathematically, and really what was also driving it was a level of as Steve said, uncertainty in the market and the chaos that ensues, and again, this is why slow, steady diplomacy and trade policy is helpful, because this is the direct manifestation of how chaos costs people money and costs jobs.
So when we get to the end of 2018, thinking of DEPCOM, AP, C2, and will you look back and say, okay, we've navigated the tariff and everything's kind of back on course, or will there be a lasting drag because of the tariff?
I mean, all indications is 2018 is going to be a down year from where we were in 2017 from a solar installation. But with all the development that's happening, 2019 is going to be a pretty good year. There should be an uptick. And 2019 is a little bit special in that the ITC, start of construction, there's a step down of 30% ITC to 26. But as long as you start construction, and there's some specific rules.
Hasn't come out yet on that yet.
But there are folks already kind of making some assumptions on that, of what is start of construction and what needs to happen to qualify for that. And we're in the midst of negotiating that with counterparties today, because they have to sign up EPCs and get these things started. But because of that, it's almost like back in 2016 when there's a huge rush to get all these projects done or started, right? So we do see 2019 is going to be a good uptick on the at least EPC side of the business, and as well as solar.
We're also not counting, but we're hoping for some level of what we're calling internally a green swan event. Every administration that we've had has been the exact and opposite manifestation of the previous one as it relates to these policies. looking at how the numbers will trade, I mean, there is a functional limitation to how low the cost of a solar panel can go even without a tariff. And then, you know, what the cost of labor is going to be, and inflation and interest rates and so on and so forth. So if the United States is serious, which we believe it is, relative to basically winning in the advancement of renewable energy, one of two ways that this needs to happen. Either there will be some sort of supplemental federal policy that will come in a new administration and congressional control, or the states will have to step up and take on that burden to make up the delta. Because there's just, you can't, if the math is tough now but doable, and then you add increased interest rates, inflation, and no drop in the cost of panels or otherwise tariffs, or slight drop in the cost of panels, that math just doesn't work in terms of being able to meet projections. You know, you can only shave so much off of soft costs. Further to that, just the ability to meet any of the state RPS goals, you know, there will need to be other supplemental policy actions that will need to occur. And then even further to that, as nuclear power plants would be turned offline, and either coal plants there's no new coal, or coal facilities are turned offline as well, you're going to need to make up that power. There's only so many gas plants you could build, especially in places like the Northeast, where pipelines are harder to develop. So, you know, something will have to give ultimately from a policy standpoint.
Okay. So, anything else on tariffs from the panel?
Yeah, so we talked about the cost side of the equation, right? The solar panels with the tariffs going up. But one of the benefits of kind of wide adaptation of solar is that the technology is actually getting better. So the roadmap that we had for efficiency of the solar modules is actually exceeding what was expected. Things like the bifacial modules, providing more production for each solar panels, right, using bifacial, and the mono technology. So the technology, I believe there's going to be more investment into the technology to get the solar panels to be more efficient, which increases the energy, right, and overall cost could go down.
So that's a good segue. So we were talking about a headwind, obviously, with the tariffs, but let's talk about tailwinds. Technology, obviously, is
Absolutely.
one, but you know, this uncertainty, I mean, it was more than just the tariffs. You had the Tax Reform Act that became effective January 1st, I think it was, of this year, and then you had the steel tariffs. So let's just talk about the ITC for a second. I mean, what's the status? I mean, is it still a full-blown tailwind? I mean, were there any enhancements in tax reform? Were there any negatives that came out of tax reform? I mean, we did a project having to do, there was an impact on, I know, prepaid PPAs. I don't know, Chad, if you want to talk about that, but let's talk about the ITC for a second.
Sure. So I guess the good news is, and I need to refer to my notes here again to get the dates right, but the tax credit survived. The ITC survived, which in the House version that was not necessarily going to be the case. And so essentially the deal that had been struck before tax reform remained in place, and the ITC for solar is essentially, as Steve said, 30% currently, and would continue as long as commencement of construction has started by the end of 2019, and then it steps down at 2020 to 26%, and then in 2021 it goes to 22%, and then in 2022 it goes to 10%, and then that's a permanent credit at that point. So there's that element of at least there's some level of certainty, and then obviously hopeful that another administration would look to extend the 30% credit. You know, that's been kind of an ongoing debate, and it's continued, I think, longer than you probably could have ever predicted that it would. So hopefully that would continue. I think the other main element that changed was, of course, the tax rate, which then changes essentially the value of the depreciation that these, so Mike mentioned the accelerated depreciation. In 2017, the tax rate was 35%. Now it's 21%. So that had a decrease in value, but of course, on the other side of it, there's the rate's gone down to 21%. So that's a good thing.
So, I mean, what we've seen, because this is not the first time, right? There's all these new regulation comes in, and usually what takes is about like 6 months for the market to kind of figure itself out, because nobody wants to be the first, person to go out there and figure it out. So they're usually about a 6-month kind of stabilization period of uncertainty, and after that it becomes a little bit more robust as more of the accountants and lawyers kind of figure out what's going to be acceptable,
right?
And then and put those value proposition back to the asset owners.
Yeah, and so there's that, and then there's there are new elements that affect international banks that have international subsidiaries. That I guess the thought is it may reduce their tax equity appetite. So it's unclear on probably very large utility scale projects. What does that do to the tax equity market? There's also this new opportunity zone program that was introduced that could be a potential tax benefit for projects that are in low-income communities. It's unclear really what kind of impact that's going to have in terms of real dollars, but to your point, if in 6 months the hope is some of this kind of shakes out.
Well, we're in the 5th month, so hopefully next month we'll be done.
Well, but we have been seeing it, to your point, Steve. I mean, I've only been at AEP for about 8 or 9 months now, but it did seem like at the end of last year, when there was all that uncertainty in the market, that people were asking questions, but no one was really eager to move forward with that uncertainty. Now that kind of that uncertainty is past us, there was kind of a lull from January, February, and March, but we've seen a lot more interest now in people at least coming back out. There's more RFPs that are coming out into the market looking for solar development, because I think people now feel that they're starting to feel more comfortable that the rules are kind of in place to move projects forward.
Go ahead, Rich.
No. The solar industry, you hear a lot of people say, I've been in the solar industry for 8 to 10 years. It's most of what I'd say modern solar industry, but the solar industry is a response to the economic crisis of 2008 as a job creator, and that's really what it has done its job. An investment tax credit is supposed to spur construction and development, and it has done that very effectively. My first projects that was in the United States, the tax credit was in place, but there was another program called the cash grant, but also in Europe. My first projects I actually worked on were in Spain and Italy, and at the time it was the same thing. There was in those places it's a cash incentive called the feed-in tariff, and there was a period for about 2 years where every quarter you wouldn't know if you missed the deadline of plugging in your project by 1 day. You wouldn't know what your tariff was going to be for the next 20 years. And so that's how I got started, is because I was looking at Italian energy policy and renewables. And I remember working on something talking to somebody from the Italian government. It's like, how can you plan this? How can this be an effective way of encouraging economic investment development? It's just very Italian. This is how we do it. Like, okay. So one would hope that would imply that it's just not how we do it in America, right? That there should not be quarter over quarter uncertainty or half year over half year uncertainty, because that is, I think, exactly what defines the American investment environment as the #1 investment environment in the world, is policy certainty, and that's and it's a shame that as it relates to renewables, which through sort of one side you want to hear that this is an important thing for jobs, for the environment, for everything else, and then to have this level of uncertainty is very unfortunate. But the good thing is, I think at this moment in time, pending anything else happening, you don't know what Twitter accounts can do, but I've said this before. if there had been one bill that had been proposed, all right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to make the tax equity portion of solar projects less valuable. We're going to make solar panels more expensive, and we're going to make steel more expensive. That bill would have died. But this was a very effective political tactic to advance a motive that accomplished all of those things, but did it in a separate cadence. And it's unfortunate, but it's also, I think, a comment to what this industry is with its staying power, that this is in the almost 10 years of doing this, the 4th or 5th time that the industry was coming to an end, and we're all here in a fancy law firm, right? So if lawyers are still doing it, there's money to be made. So at that point, I think inherent to that, there is some level, that should be a comment on what this industry is, both in terms of the people that are in it and the people who are working towards it, and how there is, sticks and stones. We'll keep on. We're going to keep on pushing through, and it will absolutely be, whether it's technology advancements or otherwise policy advancement, this is the future.
What is it about developers and lawyers? So much love.
You guys
I
all
feel
want
it.
too much money.
So a question, what percent of the deals, for all 4 of you, what percent of the deals you do roughly involve the ITC?
100%.
100%.
100%. So have any of you done a deal without the ITC?
So the one thing that I don't understand why this tax bill decided to favor us so generously is it's made all of the operating assets more valuable, which is exactly what tax code is not supposed to do. It's supposed to encourage new investment. So, right, because the tax credit has already been taken. And that's what is a functional benefit of this bill. But every new build, is still, the ITC is part of that equation.
Okay, so we've had a lot of questions, this general theme. Solar's ability to compete with fossil fuels, kind of heads up. So, the ITC is going to ramp down. I mean, maybe the first question is, with the ITC, is solar now favorably comparing with tariff rates with fossil fuels?
So there is a report out of Lazar that basically kind of highlights what is the unsubsidized cost of electricity for a different generation. And solar is around like 5 cents. Obviously, it depends on the location and the radiance of the location. But if you just strip out all the ITC, it still would be like 5.5 cents. Coal, if you had to create a new coal power plant, it's probably like 10 to 14, depending on where it is. Nuclear is around that same category, and those would take like 10 years to build. Where solar, you can build something equivalent to a coal power plant in about a year and a half. So we do believe that the long-term economics of solar is there. The economic benefits of that will be there. We have heard from other utility customers who have extended the life of the coal power plant for several years, just recently, with the kind of favorable terms of what's happening in the marketplace. But eventually, these things are going to have to be either replaced, right? That power is going to maybe have to be replaced somewhere. So eventually, these old power plants will have to be decommissioned or replaced, or something's going to happen. So we do see an opportunity in the long term, right, of solar being a valuable energy source. And I think as of last year, it was a very first time no new coal power plant came to market, right? And majority of that came from solar as a new no energy capacity.
And I would almost reject the premise of the heads up comparison. I mean, I live in New York. My federal tax dollars go to build highways here. And also the unsubsidized element. If they gave solar the MLP structure, we'll win. There's no
The master limited partnership
yeah
benefits like real estate.
Right. There's no question. So it's not, I don't think it's and policy is good. Policy incentives can be good. It's doing what it's supposed to do. And my first solar plants were $10, $11 a watt. We're building for $1 a watt now. That's what policy does. And to take the notion that it has to be, unsubsidized, it's not really unsubsidized against fossil fuels. Fossil fuels have had subsidies for
Absolutely.
a very long time, and they're not giving any of those up as part of a
Head-to-head competition.
right. And also, to be clear, even with those subsidies, the reason why the tax credit was extended in 2016 was part of a political deal to allow for natural gas exports. So now you had which was supposed, the idea of why there were no natural gas exports was to keep the cost of gas down for American citizens. So if you're going to say, okay, well, they have all these, they have policy mechanisms which are inherently subsidies, and then they couldn't even do that, so we now have to export it to the broader market so that it can be sold at a price to make it competitive. It doesn't, it's not solar that has a problem with subsidies. It's everybody else. We'll take it, we need it. It's, there are a lot of people say they want the end of the tax credit. I'm not one of those people, but the...
Nor am I.
Right, well, fair enough. But the notion that policy incentives, number one, in any way are ever going to go away is not there. But it is an inherently political argument, not a factual one, that the inclusion of solar or renewables or anything else as in a policy package, a benefit package, is adverse.
Okay, but Rich, so stipulate to that, if you were testifying before the U.S. Senate Ways and Means Committee and some senator said, project out, when would be the right time to diminish the value of the ITC, ultimately remove the ITC because solar has matured to the point that it shouldn't need that subsidy? What would you say to that question?
I would say never. Why are you saying to me that you either have to say you want more of a clean power source or you don't? So the notion of having a tax credit program that is going to do that, or anything that is going to do that, even if it's a pat on the back and an encouraging word, it should always be there. That is what government is supposed to be doing. It's obviously lost in a broader political argument, but I'm a U.S. history and poli-sci major before I was a finance guy. Solar, more than any other asset, or renewables, I'd say generally, more than any other asset classes, has continued to need to justify its existence in a political environment in a way that no other technology has. This is across renewables, not just solar, but fossil fuels haven't had to justify their effect on the American economy. There is a positive impact in terms of what it does.
So a little bit of a segue. Solar doesn't have the same reliability as a fossil fuel, and Steve, you mentioned the whole storage issue, which is a fascinating development in solar. So what's the status of, we should just take a few minutes and just talk about storage. What's the status? Can solar with storage start to have all those characteristics, those reliability characteristics?
Right now there's a lot of interest, and a lot of utilities especially are looking into it, but nobody's kind of taking a big step to try to put a program in there that's actual project. But there's a lot of discussion and interest to make the solar storage work. But I do akin to storage being something like what solar was, let's say even 10 years ago, where California and other states are actually putting these incentives because they have actual problems where the price of electricity around like 5 or 6, 7 o'clock that just shoots up because they have so much solar and not enough power to do that. So there's an economic interest why they are doing that. But right now, we believe that solar with storage could be the next wave of to kind of manage the electric generation. We do think it's solar, wind, natural gas are kind of the three main players that will dominate in going forward. And it'll be very interesting to see how storage will come into that play. And there's a lot of people doing it and dabbling into it and putting proposals. But there's gonna be challenges, and not only capture of ITC for how do you do that, replacement costs of the batteries, and all those different nuances will come to play.
And going to the certainty element, I think there's been uncertainty in the industry as to whether batteries would qualify for the ITC, and there's been guidance now that seems to be indicating that it can qualify. So hopefully with that certainty, then they'll become more financeable and bring that price down.
I think that's the biggest problem is with the solar projects today, because of some of the impacts of the tariff. They're marginal now. You add battery on top of it, but if you look up where solar was a few years ago on a cost per watt and how far we've come, I think to your point you made a little bit earlier, Steve, is that as technology starts to improve, I think solar will become much more of a key player in the solar market. But right now, I think it's just, some of these solar projects have a very thin margin. That now if you try to put battery on top of it, it makes it a little more difficult to sell, because at the end, people still want to try to save money and not have the rates go up too significantly. So I think over time, as the technology starts to improve, costs will come down and make it more cost competitive.
It's also a harder sell, just as a developer, right? People say storage, and they say, oh, solar plus storage. Solar's simple at this point, right? It's power going into your system. Storage can be demand response, it can be peak shaving, it can be reliability, and you try and ask people what their electricity rate is, most people don't know, and then you start talking to them about, well, do you want demand response? And just don't talk to me about that. So it's a harder sell, which I think is actually, I think it's actually a development marketing endeavor as much as it is a technology one, because I think people, if people understood how to care about it in a way, I think they'd be willing to pay more for it.
Well, so I'll ask a similar question that I asked before as far as the four of you and your experience. You've done hundreds of megawatts of solar between the four of you. Have any of you done a project with battery, with storage?
Yes.
You have? Anybody?
Well, in Hawaii, we have a couple projects we've done in Hawaii. We're looking at several in the New York area, because there are some grants that potentially could impact.
And Hawaii was unique, I'm sure,
Yes.
because of just the price of electricity.
Correct.
And, So Rich, have you done a battery?
We're building our first one. It's going to be a big one. It's 650 kW. It's very exciting. We're mainly doing it so that we can say that we've done it. But yeah.
Smart strategy.
Yeah.
Steve?
We were trying to get into that deal, but no, we have a very highly skilled electrical engineers that are been doing this for over 15 years. So they know solar extremely well. We do have initiatives now to really support the storage side. And we have an R&D team that focuses on that, and we have provided in-depth analysis of what's really bankable, because it's good to say that you can do it, but can a bank finance it, or tax equity guys kind of look at it? Is there operating risks, and how do you do the O&M on those things, and what are the O&M costs? So all that, we're doing it in a way that we can make that bankable and financeable. So we have done that we have put a lot of bid in supporting the bids in those initiatives, but from an actual execution, we have not.
I wish DEPCOM were in that deal, because the only way I could get that deal financed from a tax equity standpoint is if I took the tax credits. So.
All right. So this handout right here, and I know we're getting near the end here, but I thought this was kind of fascinating from SEIA about corporate solar users. And not on this list, but we all read it here in Cleveland, was the article about Fifth Third Bank, and I think that they went 100% renewable as well. So just for the panel to maybe give a little bit of color on this chart, I mean, how does Target, Walmart, Apple, Kohl's, I mean, how does that even happen? What does that mean when we read these articles that they're going 100% renewable? I mean, are they putting solar on all their rooftops and getting all their power from solar? I mean, what does that mean?
I think Rich is probably the most knowledgeable person on this, because you've got to.
So we're working with one of the companies on that list on a very large rollout across a chunk of their portfolio that will actually be. It's very exciting, and it's solar, carports, and the like, as well as other corporate initiatives. But it is a combination of behind the meter and on-site generation. The thing about all those corporates is that they're very sophisticated buyers, and it is an economic proposition more than it is an environmental one. And you still got to be competitive. So we will announce this transaction at some point in the next few months. But it's the corporate user is, I think, the next forefront, whether it's on-site or virtual PPAs. That will be a big part of our development strategy moving forward.
Anybody else working on these corporate PPA type structures?
I mean, we build for asset owner that ultimately has a offtake with a corporate PPAs. So from an EPC and O&M perspective, it'd be no different than for us to sell it to a utility who has an offtake. But the structure is what the developer and financing guys structured a deal to have the offtake to be a corporate PPA buyers. But if you look at the kind of the stack of who actually buys power, is you have residential, and you have commercial that has the actual facility in their solar power plants in their facility behind the meter. But also we have virtual PPAs that corporate buyers can buy. We have municipals or cities that would buy PPAs, and then off-takers like utilities. And the thing interesting about that is now utility is, in the past, have kind of been a more, I would say, passive. They've been issuing PPAs and buy the power at a fixed price for X number of years, which kind of hedges the inflation and natural gas prices and things like that. But it's a take or pay kind of contract. What they are doing now is like they are in the process doing build, own, transfer. So they're willing to buy these power plants under their assets, right, versus issuing PPA. So that's a kind of a dynamics that we see in the marketplace as well.
Well, and I think it's tough to answer that with one solution. I mean, if you look at to like your point, if you're in New York and you put in 10 megawatts of solar, so I think a lot of times there's ways you have to kind of look at your geography and figure out what's the best solution or how do you fit it. A lot of colleges and universities sign this President's Commitment to Climate Change. So it's kind of tough for them to put, all of that resource that they have, because a lot of them are little cities within a city. The loads are pretty intensive. So how do you meet that? Sometimes it's not just through one resource. They have to look at, combined heat and power or other types of resources that can give them that credit at the end of the day. So I think, unfortunately, there's not just one silver bullet that can fix that, but there are ways through PPAs on larger projects, but then sometimes you are looking at kind of a host of different types of solutions to get there.
Well, I mean, Rich, being from New York City, I mean, obviously having land's a premium. So, the companies that are in New York City that want to do solar, they can't probably go behind the meter. So are they doing a virtual PPA, and what does that look like?
Yeah, no, I'm usually, I'm a guy who, tax dollars are I'm more on the liberal side of things, but I was very upset that my New York City tax dollars went to building a calculator for how much solar you could put on all the rooftops in Manhattan, which really seemed like a waste of money. I think it's a virtual PPA opportunity, but for us, a big segment of our growth is in community solar, which is exciting because it brings this, our focus, which is this non-residential segment, together with EPC companies like Depcom or just Depcom, no other EPC companies, just Depcom, where you can get the benefit of utility scale build pricing passed through to consumers who can't do on-site generation. So in New York, you are able to build projects in particular zones and then sell basically subscriptions to your solar plant that, depending on when you got it permitted, provides a direct credit to the retail rate. So it's effectively like having solar on your home or on your office building. But it's great because you don't have some guy coming to your house, drilling on your roof, doing all this stuff. And so we think that community solar is going to be the future of any larger scale build development for our type of clients. And this is also, about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, New Jersey just passed a new RPS with a particular carve out for community solar. New York is very aggressive community solar. Minnesota has one of the most successful community solar programs. We operate a lot of community solar. We're building in Minnesota community solar. We operate in Massachusetts community solar, and a large, approximately $100 million portfolio of community solar in New York. We're developing projects in New Jersey as well. But that is, in our opinion, the future of some level of project development. But it's also the past, right? It's just building a power plant and selling power from it to a number of different offtakes. It's just their particular their particular policy structures which make it more valuable.
Yep. So Mike, for those people in the Midwest, is there any traction for community solar in your,
we're seeing a lot more
nationwide, but what's that?
We're seeing a lot more interest in it, definitely.
But in Ohio, you can't do it, as far as in a public utility service territory. Some of the munis do allow community solar.
Right, or have a footprint or put their own projects together, correct?
Right. So, are you working on any community solar right now?
Me personally, no.
Yeah.
No. But across the United States, again, we're not regulated to just Ohio. We are working across the United States with other states.
So just overview, what is the majority of all of your projects, are they behind the meter still? Is that a fair statement?
Well, again, AEP's got two groups. We have the on-site
right,
partner,
you're all
which
behind the meter.
The group I work for is behind the meter, but we
Right.
do have a renewable group as well that works in front of the meter. So we are developing those as they come. So.
Okay. Rich, what about you? More behind or in front? Good
Both.
mix?
Both,
Yeah. Steve?
No, community solar program is just kind of very simply, right? It is a great initiative for value chain that just benefits everybody, right? So you have a consumer who's going to subscribe at a lower cost that they would get from retail. So they get a benefit of lower electric bill, right? Then you have a generation owner that's going to benefit, right, through residual income from that electric structure, and they get a tax credit. Then you have guys like us go in and design and build and operate and maintain, and we build it. Local economic impact to creating jobs, property tax, and other benefits that comes with just investment and new facilities. So it's a great avenue for us to for policymakers to look at community solar program, the economic interest for all various parties, and grow that power generation. Northeast has got a huge problem. They're going to have some nuclear power plants, some gas power plants. They cannot get it permitted. So they're anticipating that there's this massive need for new power, and they don't know how to do it. Right? There's not enough land for solar or anything like that. But so before you get to that kind of crisis mode, policymakers should look at what the load is and what the decommissioning schedule looks like, and find a measure whether it's solar or natural gas to supplement those for consumer buyers.
All right, so we're going to go over just a couple minutes to try to just touch on these questions. So this is lightning round, 10-second responses
Uh-oh.
to these questions, just so we can just
capable of that.
just so we can touch on. All right. Any comment on Tesla's potential impact on the solar industry?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just Tesla, it's all the electric cars. You're just going to need more electricity, and more electricity that's needed, the better.
Okay. Mike, maybe this is you. Any recent regulatory developments in Ohio or at the PUCO that give you optimism?
I'll say I'm new, so I don't know of any at this point.
Okay. I know there's some net metering rule changes that are being on the docket, and they seem like they're maybe a little bit of an improvement. I can think of a couple areas, but I could think of a lot of things they could be doing that they're not doing too.
And that's why we focus more on putting it behind the meter and getting all the energy to stay there, so that we don't have to worry about some of those net metering challenges.
Yeah. Richard, I think you're going to end up with a sidebar on subsidies after this forum.
I just want to say there are gold-plated schools in rural Texas, which, why would there be gold-plated schools in rural Texas? Is because some guy developed a wind farm nearby and they're paying a lot of property taxes. I mean, it passes through.
I mean, this one question is on the job creation involved with solar industry versus the job creation in the fossil fuel industry, and should subsidies, I guess, be based on job creation?
They pay for a lot more television ads than we do, so there's some media guys that I'm sure are doing well.
Okay, that's good. You're going to get cornered after the meeting, I can tell that. This question says.
Let me jump in on that one. I mean, the tax
15
credit
seconds.
the tax credit is based upon costs that have been incurred, and you don't get the tax credit until the project's done. So at some level, somebody had to have made this investment in order to get the benefit of the tax credit. So it's not some kind of handout in that respect.
Yep. What about making hydrogen from excess renewables? Anybody? All right. We're coming near the end. Do you want to all take maybe just 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and any final comments?
Yeah, final comment is that whether it's Bloomberg Energy or the Department of Energy forecast, by 2050, 50% of all new solar in the world, all new electric generation that will come online in the world will be solar, right? Whether there's a subsidy or no subsidy or whatever it may be. So solar is definitely in its early infancy, and it will continue to grow as the market matures.
I just think in terms of talking with people that have a national outlook and are doing deals across the country, I think it shows Ohio and the Midwest really the opportunity that is out there and that ultimately will be realized here. So I just think it's an exciting discussion and appreciate everyone being on the panel.
Well, and I think, been in the energy industry for a long time, both on investor-owned and on municipal, so I've seen a lot of energy. Actually, when I started as a student, one of the engineers said, you may not make a great living, but you'll make a living because everybody needs energy. And I think that becomes a point where, down the road, everybody still, we may be more efficient plugging in different types of light bulbs, but now we plug in 3 cell phones. So, we have, more TVs in our home than we ever had before. So, you look at, energy is still going to be required. I keep telling my kids they need to create the dilithium crystal so we can become richer than Bill Gates. So, but energy definitely is something that we need, and definitely I think, solar is going to play a bigger and bigger role as we go forward.
Yeah, I think combination of Steve, Mike, and Chad's points here. It's It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time, and to what Steve was saying about Tesla, whether or not Tesla is the electric car or one of 50 electric cars, the gas engine is going away. It's going to happen, and so you're going to have to electrify more things. That's how utility companies are going to always have a need, and you're going to have to build power for that. And no one, I don't care how much of a supporter of coal you are, I don't think anyone wants one built next door. So, and at that point, the biggest complaint that we've had about solar for any new project that we've ever had to build is to plant a couple more trees so people can't see it from the road. You cannot do that with a coal plant. So we think it's just a matter of time, and we're very excited and appreciate being here and having the opportunity to speak.
Great. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Steve and Chad and Mike and Rich, and thank you all for joining us here in person, and those of you that joined us on the webinar. If you're still there on the webinar and want to submit questions via email, somebody from our energy group will get back to you. I guess the last comment, since I get to make the last comment, a couple years ago, Bill Gates, in his annual letter, talked about energy, talked about the electrification of the world, and pointed out that there was still 1 billion people in the world that didn't have access to electricity. And just echoing some of these comments, what gets me excited is the fact that the United States now, for a variety of reasons, clearly is the leader, the energy leader in the world. And at some point, and I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but hopefully soon, we'll start thinking about taking our energy resources and tackling that problem of electrification for those 1 billion people that don't have electricity. I mean, that, talk about a foreign policy built on a strength. If we ever reach that point where we're, doing that work, it really will be incredible. And thank you again for joining us. The panelists said that they'll stick around for those of you that want to have some sidebars after this meeting, but we're adjourned. Thank you.